know if I can say this. I don't think I can say this on YouTube. I don't know that I can even say that, but it's true. Can I even talk about this on YouTube? Oh my gosh. I don't know that that's YouTube friendly. We're already tiptoeing on being shadow banned. Okay. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bug of the Week. And on this episode, through our journey through all of the insect orders, we have arrived at Dermaptera, also known as earwigs. So I know a lot of people don't really like earwigs. They kind of look weird, kind of creepy, but I'm hoping that I can maybe change your mind about them because they are very interesting, very cool. I think they're really cute, and a lot is misunderstood about them. So starting off with some general information about this order. First of all, Dermaptera comes from the Greek root derma, which means skin, and of course aptera, which means wings. This order contains about 1,800 species worldwide within 10 different families. You can find about 30 different species in North America, and so I'm sure many of you have seen these guys before. These insects range in size from usually about 6 to 25 millimeters in length, so about 1/4 of an inch to an inch long. So they don't really get super big. There are some larger species, but for the most part, earwigs are sort of on the smaller side. Now, I'm going to say that generally because, of course, there is one species of earwig that is very, very large. That is the St. Helena earwig. They can go up to 3.3 inches in length, but that is a massive exception. You know, most of them range up to an inch. So, first off, earwigs. Why do they have that name? Well, you know, there's an old urban legend that says that earwigs can climb in your ears, and that stemmed from a old legend in the Victorian era where, you know, men would wear these big wigs, and basically the idea was that earwigs would be found in the wigs, climb in their ear while they're sleeping, and then eat their brains. So I don't know where that came from, but it's obviously not true. They do not climb in your ears, although I do kind of understand why a lot of people don't like them. You will often find earwigs in your shower or on the playground as a kid or on the picnic table. You know, they definitely like warm, damp, drab areas, and so I can understand why a lot of people might not like them. But like I said a minute ago, there's a lot of very cute and charming things about earwigs, so I'm going to try and change your mind today, like I always try to do. So as always, before we get into the life history of earwigs, let's go over their anatomy a little bit. How can you identify them? What makes them unique? So earwigs actually, in a lot of ways, resemble very similar to some beetles, especially one family of beetles called the rove beetles. And that kind of makes sense because Dermaptera often have triangular shaped head with chewing mandibles, circular eyes that are spaced apart from each other. I would say their heads and most of their bodies look very similar to beetles, which we haven't talked about beetles yet, but a lot of people can confuse Dermaptera for beetles. There are a couple of very unique criteria that earwigs have. So I would say the most prominent feature of the Dermaptera, the earwigs, are their pincher-like cerci. So we've talked about cerci a lot with a lot of these basal insect orders, but the cerci of the earwigs are very, very unique. They're pincher-like. They're very large, sclerotized, which means they're hardened and more structure to them. They're forceps pincher-like, which is very unique and characteristic of earwigs. If this rings a bell also, I talked about in the Diplura video that there are some members of that group that have pincher-like cerci, but with the earwigs, they all have the pincher-like cerci. Now, something that makes them unique is they have these pincher-like cerci along with these unique wing structures, which is where they get their name, Dermaptera, which is skin wings. So a lot of people might not know this because they don't use them very often, but earwigs do indeed have wings, and that's what these little shield-like flaps are on the top of their bodies. This is the first time I've talked about these, but these are called tegmina, and that is that the first set of the wings, the four wings, are a leathery, hard material called tegmina that they don't actually use to fly, but rather they use it to protect the delicate flying wings. So the Dermaptera have the leathery tegmina that their name is for. Now underneath with the hind wings, you might be wondering, well, can earwigs fly with those little tiny wings? And the answer is yes. So something really cool about the earwigs is that they do have a pair of wings underneath those tegmina, but they fold them up like origami. Here's a video of that. And so they fold them up almost like one of those paper fans. And so when they need to fly, they will open up the tegmina, unfurl these wings, and fly away with them. Now, a lot of people don't know that earwigs can fly because they don't fly very often. I've never seen an earwig fly, and I would see these guys all the time growing up in Washington. I didn't actually know that these guys could fly until very recently. So yeah, if you see an earwig fly, that's very, very rare. They're not very good flyers. They often don't need to disperse very much, and that's kind of the point of flying, is getting from one place to another. They're not very good at flying, so this is a rare circumstance, but yes, indeed, they do have wings. They can fly, and I think their wings are quite beautiful to look at. Okay, next up is their head, like I mentioned. Earwigs typically have a triangular-shaped head with a pair of widely spaced compound eyes. Nothing really crazy here. Dermaptera always have chewing, biting mouth parts. Lastly is the antennae. Earwigs often have long, thread-like or bead-like antennae that they use for chemosensation. But I also mentioned they have the cerci. The cerci they also use for chemosensation and airborne vibration detection. So what do earwigs eat? Well, they kind of eat everything. Some of them eat detritus, which is like decaying plants. A lot of them eat, decaying organic matter. A lot of them are really good decomposers, and some of them are even carnivores. They'll eat small insects and other things like that. Okay, now that we're done with the anatomy, I want to talk a little bit about some of their life history and the super cool behavioral things that a lot of the earwigs have. So, first of all, their pincher-like cerci do look pretty scary, look pretty gnarly, right? But they can't actually pinch you. So that's nothing to be afraid of. They don't have the necessary muscles to forcibly pinch anything with them. Like I said, they're mostly for sensory and mate selection. And so the males use these cerci to attract mates. And so the males will typically have larger, more curved cerci, while the females have smaller, more straight cerci. So that's even a good way to tell males and females apart too. So if you ever catch one and you're able to look up the species, try comparing the cerci from the one that you collected to images online. See if it has larger curved or smaller, straighter cerci, and that'll tell you if it's male or female. As for the development of the earwigs, they are another hemimetabolous insect, meaning they have a 3-stage life cycle, which is egg to nymph to adult. And as for the nymphs, they kind of just look like smaller versions of the adults. They just have no wings at all. So that's a good rule of thumb. If you see a earwig with wings, that's going to be an adult. If they do not have wings, it's probably an immature nymph. And last fun fact about the anatomy of the earwig is everyone's favorite part, reproduction. It's like the coolest fact. It's like the most fun fact about earwigs, though. So yeah, it's true. Male earwigs have 2 adiagi, which is the bug proper word. Another fun fact, male earwigs seem to have a preference for whether they prefer the right or the left one. Just like how humans are right-handed or left-handed, earwigs are right-penised or left-penised. Okay, all jokes aside, this is actually an interesting strategy because they have a backup. So if something happens and one of the adiagi happens to become damaged or breaks off because they need to evade predators, they still have a backup one to use, and so they can still continue on with their genes. All right, now that we're done with that, earwigs have a lot of really interesting behavioral and social structures that I'd love to talk about. So, first of all, something that's really weird about them is there are some species that actually give live birth. So they don't actually lay the eggs. The eggs hatch in the female, and she then lays the born offspring. So they're not, placental mammals. They don't have a placenta. It's still an egg, but it just hatches inside of the female before she lays it. So it's a lot like some snakes that do this. So, for example, the garter snakes will do this, where they sort of give live birth, but not really, because they're still using an egg. They just don't have an actual womb or placenta like mammals and a couple other animals do. But for the most part, most earwigs lay eggs like your average insect. But something very cool across all of earwigs is parental care, specifically maternal care, which is when the mother cares for the offspring. So this actually works out perfectly because this is another aspect of insect sociality that I introduced last week. So last week we talked about communal living in Zooptera, the angel insects. And this is the next version of insect sociality that I'd like to talk about, and that is parental care. So basically across insects, parental care is very, very rare for the most part. And so typically what happens is insects will lay eggs and then leave them. So the vast majority of insects do not care for their young anywhere past oviposition, which is the act of laying the eggs. So if you think about it, this is an effective strategy for insects. You can get more eggs out there. You have a higher chance of those eggs surviving if you lay more. And basically what you're doing is, I'm going to lay as many eggs as possible so that maybe some of them might survive. Now, the cost to that is that oftentimes many of them don't survive to adulthood because there is no care for them. They're completely independent, and they have to completely survive on their own, often even needing to compete with their own siblings for resources. Another big benefit to this is that insects don't really live very long, and so the female insect doesn't really have much time to care for her offspring. And so, just laying a bunch of eggs and going on with your day is a really good strategy, and it works most of the time. Now, earwigs are the first order that I want to talk about that demonstrates maternal care, which is the mother caring for her young past oviposition. So this is something across all of Dermaptera. They all exhibit some form of maternal care. So yes, earwigs are very good moms. It's a very wholesome thing. And so basically what typically happens is the mother will lay a clutch of eggs in one area, and it'll usually be in the ground or in a log or something like that, and she will protect the eggs with her life, essentially. And so, across earwigs, we see at least this level of maternal care. Some of them extend even beyond this to where once the eggs hatch and they're little tiny nymphs, the mother will still care for them. She will protect them. She will bring them food through the form of trophallaxis. Trophallaxis is something that a lot of insects do to feed each other directly, much like a mother bird will feed her baby birds mouth to mouth. A lot of insects do that as well, and earwigs are one of them. So she will directly provide food for the young. And so earwigs are very good moms, and I think it's really cool, really interesting, really cute. But the big benefit to maternal care is that it ensures better that most of your offspring will survive. Whereas if you just lay eggs and leave them alone, a lot less of them are going to survive. So yes, it is a big cost. You don't get to produce as many offspring. You need to kind of hunker down and focus on caring for your young, but the quality of your young will be much higher in this case. Now, another thing that earwigs do, which is the most extreme form of maternal care, is something called matrophagy. So matrophagy is when the young eat their own mother. So that's the most extreme form of maternal care, and some earwigs do it. And so basically, after caring for the young for a while, the mother earwig will willingly lay there while her young consume her. And this is the ultimate form, the ultimate sacrifice. She doesn't get to reproduce anymore. She likely only produces one clutch of eggs, but it's the most extreme form, and those young are often very, very successful because this is a huge, nutrient source that the young get a jump start to life with. So although matrophagy is rare among pretty much every animal across the board because it is so extreme, it does happen in earwigs, it happens in some spiders, and some other insects. So with Mother's Day coming up, definitely thank your mom out there, and, think about the earwigs out there who are really good mothers. And with that, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something about earwigs. They're very misunderstood, and a lot of people don't like them. And I hope that I might have sort of opened your eyes to how cool these little these little insects are. With that, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment if I left anything out. Maybe your favorite earwig, or maybe something that I just didn't mention. Next week, we are talking about Plecoptera, which are these stoneflies. You definitely don't want to miss that one. They are super interesting. But with that, I will see you all next week. But until then, keep on bugging. See ya.